At Gilbert's Deli on a lovely morning, Molly is trying to master the art of making a perfect egg cream. It is her fourth attempt at it, and the judge is her grandmother Ruth, who is also the one teaching her the recipe. After taking a sip, she assures her that she's getting there. Molly is frustrated. She should have perfected it by now, but nothing seems to work. Eve, Molly's mother, asks Ruth why she's torturing her granddaughter. Ruth says Molly will be running the deli in a year or two, and she needs to know how to make all the basic dishes they serve, just like she and her husband taught Molly's dad. She wants to make sure Molly learns everything before her time comes. Molly's dad stops his mom from saying anything more and says they all know she is immortal. Ruth asks Molly to try one more time and advises her to swirl it and not stir it with force. Molly looks at her dad with helpless eyes. She tries to wiggle her way out of it and asks her dad if they need help at the back, as people are going to be lining up at the crack of dawn to get lax for the first night of Hanukkah. Her father tells her it is going to be way too hectic, and they are making more lax than ever. Eve hopes it is enough. Molly doesn't understand. Eve explains they either break even or make a profit, and this year, they're a little further from even. Ruth says she is not worried and believes they'll make even more profit than last year. Stan tries to make a joke, but Ruth gets irritated as everybody passes a suppressed smile looking at Stan's effort to impress Ruth. The mouth-watering visuals of various dishes are shown, which is enough to make anybody drool. At a different eating joint called Zimmer's, Jacob shows his mom the menorah with glow bulbs at the top that he has ordered for Hanukkah. His mom, Liz, says it is beautiful. She then asks her son if he really can't stay with them for the first night of Hanukkah. Jacob says he has to meet with the building owner in New York. He suggests they make a video for him to see later. Soon his dad, Ed, joins them and asks if he's sure he doesn't want him to come with him to New York. They are planning to open a branch of their eatery at a new location across the country. His dad is worried about the red tapeism and whether his son will be able to handle it. Jacob assures him he'll be fine as after his Bubby, Mom, and Dad, he knows his business the best. Liz tries to persuade him to come back after the business is set up and running. But Jacob has different plans. He wants to stay there and manage it himself. His mother says he can't do that as she'll miss him very much and starts smothering him with kisses. Ed tries to argue with Liz and says he has to fly away from the nest someday. But Liz counters Ed and asks why he has to leave the nest just so that he can fly into a window and die. Jacob laughs at their metaphoric talk and says he loves her too. Ed wants to make sure that Jacob finds suppliers who can handle their menu. He wants to make sure customers get what they want before walking out of Zimmer's. Jacob asks about poutine and if he should keep that since nobody has ever ordered that in the last 20 years. Ed wants him to keep everything as it is. Jacob has no choice but to call out to his Bubby, Esther, to back him up. But to his surprise, Esther says they are not going to change anything and tells them the legacy of her mother, who had come there in 1914, and how she could not find the food that reminded her of her home. So she opens Zimmer's so that everybody could have a taste of their home. She describes their menu as America's melting pot. As they are having that conversation, Liz comes excited and says someone just ordered poutine. But Jacob catches on to their lie, which gives Liz another chance to fawn over her son. Liz asks Jacob if he has found a place to stay, and he says he is in the same street as their business. His Bubby tries to slide in on the topic of him finding a nice Jewish girl, but he changes the conversation with a joke about not being able to take this baggage with him in the cabin. Jacob has reached New York City. The building he's staying in has a letterbox near the reception, and Jacob is trying hard to open his mail, but he can't seem to do it. Another tenant comes with her dog in her purse, who barks at Jacob, scaring him. Jacob tries his luck by asking her if she knows what to do. But the woman is very rude and says he could be a thief. Jacob tries to rationalize with her, but she accuses him of being a scammer and walks away. Molly comes right at that moment and chuckles, seeing what is happening. She asks Jacob if the lady accused him of robbing her, and Jacob gets concerned. He asks if the neighborhood isn't safe. Molly laughs and says the neighborhood is safe. It is just that the tenant he just encountered looks at everybody with suspicion because she watches too many true crime documentaries. Molly recalls an ordeal and says for a few months the lady tenant thought Molly was a spy. Molly also warns Jacob of Thomas, the receptionist, who keeps giving him death stares. She says he could lose a finger if he doesn't watch out with him. He says he has all the paperwork for the apartment he has rented. Molly says she knows and then shows him how to open his mailbox. He wonders if she must have been staying in this building for a long time. She affirms it and says her great-grandparents moved into this building from Ellis Island. They exchange introductions, and Molly takes his phone to give him her number. Jacob is surprised and says he is flattered. Molly soon bursts his bubble and says she is not hitting on him but just being a good neighbor, and adds he is not her type. Jacob asks what her type is, and Molly blatantly mocks him and says men who can open their mailbox without any help, making Thomas spit his coffee out as he laughs. Jacob tells her he is from Los Angeles. Molly advises him to have thicker skin if he intends to survive in New York. Molly is preparing to leave. She picks a handful of snacks for the road. Her Bubby asks why she's leaving so early. She teases Molly by asking if she has a date, Molly brushes her off, saying she wants to sleep early as the next day is the big day, and her mother gives her some leftovers to take, much against her wishes. Jacob is on a video call with his parents. Esther soon joins in and says she wants to talk with Jacob alone. In the same plane, Molly's Bubby, Ruth, comes to meet her and says they need to talk. They both are concerned about their respective grandson and granddaughter settling down. Molly says she has a tendency to stay with guys for too long, which is exhausting. But their grandmothers have that covered too. Ruth hands Molly an envelope, and Esther has kept the same colored envelope in Jacob's bag. It is a gift card from Mizanski's matchmaking to find their beshert, Yiddish for soulmates. Their grandmas have signed them both to this matchmaking service. The woman who makes it possible is Rose Mizanski, who is the best matchmaker in Brooklyn. She does things in the old-fashioned way. Molly and Jacob try to refuse, but the payment has already been made. The grandmas wish them happy Hanukkah. Jacob and Molly try to buy time as they are focusing on the business, but the grandmas let them know that it is too late as Rose has already found a match. Rose enters her office, which looks like we are taking a trip back in time some 50 years ago. She looks at the pictures of Jacob and Molly with a broad smile as she has matched the two. The next day, Gilbert's Deli is brimming with people. Molly receives a package from the matchmaking agency. It is a sophisticated box with a pen, paper, a note, and some instructions given along. According to their instructions, neither of the parties can share their real name, location, or any other identifying information. Ruth suggests she use an alias and tells her the names David and Beth have been chosen for them. Molly further reads that they cannot text, no email, or photo share, no internet searches, and no talking on the phone. They have to write letters to each other, and there is stationery provided for that. Molly is not sure she has that kind of patience, but Ruth says she doesn't have to worry as the man writes first. Jacob finds himself in a similar situation. He shares with his bubby that he has very bad handwriting. Esther assures him he doesn't have to worry and he can take his sweet time. With that, she ends the call. Jacob has no clue how to start, but he builds up some energy and starts writing on the stationery provided, only for it to see the bottom of the bin. After many failed attempts, Jacob gets up for a break. It is harder than he anticipated. It is the first day of Hanukkah, and there is a long queue in front of Gilbert's Deli. Molly passes the customers their waiting numbers. She hands out the last number when Jacob greets her. He asks what is happening, and she tells him the people in line are waiting for the best Lex in town. Jacob is not impressed and says that the place is a bit run down, and as is said, if the place is run down, the food too is run down. Molly tells him the place is 100 years old. Stan walks to Molly and complains that her grandmother kicked him out for poking his head in the kitchen. Molly reminds him that was bound to happen as the kitchen is off limits while they're making the legs, as her bubby wants no one to see their secret recipe. Stan says he'll marry her, and that will solve the problem. Saying that he leaves, and Molly chuckles. Jacob realizes he was rude for saying all those things, and he apologizes. Molly says he doesn't have to worry about it. Jacob has to run for a meeting, and Molly takes a jibe at him and says she has to serve the rundown food to the people and wishes him happy Hanukkah. Jacob tries to apologize again, but she walks off before that. "You too," is all he manages to say. He groans as he turns to leave. He is embarrassed and wishes he could hide his head inside a hole like an ostrich. Everybody gathers to sing at the menorah lighting. Once done, Molly spots Jacob, who approaches her and says she did not tell him about the menorah lighting. Molly jokingly reminds him of the menorah lighting and says he can stick around if he wants to, as they'll be singing Jewish songs and handing out cookies. Jacob gets a message that he hasn't started the letter yet, and that is followed by a call from his grandma. Jacob talks to her in such a way that no one can make out who he is talking to. He ends the call by saying "love you." He tells Molly he has to go as he has got a deadline to meet. Molly asks what he does, and he lies he's in sales. He soon leaves, and Molly gets busy singing with everybody. Once back to his apartment, Jacob lights up some candles and starts writing the letter. He starts with fun facts about himself and proceeds to say that in his previous relationship, he wasn't ready for a forever quotient, and he still isn't ready. But he is giving this matchmaking thing a chance for the sake of his bubby, but he doesn't want to lead her on, so he asks if they can at least be friends. With that, he sends the letter signed under the name David. The messenger reaches the building to take the letter. The receptionist, Thomas, hands him the letter, and the messenger calls Jacob to send him the address of the recipient. Unbeknownst to all but the messenger and recipient, both the sender and recipient reside in the same building. Beth chuckles as she reads the letter and decides to send a reply. She writes in her letter that she is doing this for her bubby too, and she'll be happy to become his pen pal. She pities the matchmaker as they are going to ruin her perfect record and confesses it is refreshing to be this honest with somebody. She continues writing for a long time before she stops. After sealing it in an envelope, she goes downstairs and gives the letter to Thomas to give to the messenger. The messenger comes and shares that sneaking is stressing him out. Thomas asks if all he does is change envelopes, he can take care of it. The messenger is grateful and promises to share half of his fee with him. He hands him a dozen envelopes before giving him a fist bump and leaving. Thomas hands Jacob the letter, and Jacob reads it there, laughing all the way till he finishes reading. More appetizing dishes are shown, enough to make you think about your life choices of sitting hungry for too long. That morning when Molly reaches Gilbert's deli, her whole family is excited to know if she received a letter. She says she did, and they are going to be very good pen pals. They squeal with excitement. Ruth asks when she is going to write back, and she says she already did, but bursts their bubble of excitement by telling them they both are on the same page and are not ready yet. Molly proposes a Hanukkah song contest at Gilbert's after the menorah lighting. The winner shall get free lax for the rest of Hanukkah. Jacob clicks the pictures of the rented place for his deli. The owner of the place tells him the place was a Jewish deli before he rented it out. She adds that they were not doing well and had to close down. She thinks Gilbert's will meet the same fate in 10 years or so because they too are not doing as well as they used to. Jacob says Zimmer's is different as they have a modern approach and a bigger menu. She says she wasn't trying to talk him out of it, and adds their lax better be good as nobody beats Gilbert's. At Gilbert's everybody is singing Hanukkah songs. Jacob arrives, and Molly thanks him because their conversation last night made her come up with the idea of a contest. Molly introduces Jacob to her family and tells them he's renting the same building they reside in for a couple of months. They make him try some of their foods, and Jacob is instantly a fan. They share some of the making processes, and Molly asks him to leave a review online as not many people who come to their place know how to use the internet efficiently. Ruth hears their conversation and looks a bit upset hearing that. The contest was a success, and everybody enjoyed themselves. After everybody has left, Molly gives the winner her prize. 3 large packages of lax, enough for the remaining days of Hanukkah. Jacob has ordered almost everything on the menu and is taste testing everything. He claims the rye bread to be the best one he's had, and Molly says this is what everyone who eats authentic Jewish deli for the first time says. Jacob is about to tell her that it is not his first time, but gets interrupted by his friend Ezra who recognizes him and comes to meet him. Ezra comments if he's here to scope up the competition. Molly doesn't get it and asks what they are talking about. Jacob turns to Molly looking guilty. Molly doesn't want to upset her family, so she drags him outside and confronts him. She asks him if that was the reason he was snooping around to steal their recipes and take them back to Los Angeles. He says it is not like that, but then tells her that his family is planning to open Zimmer's in the Lower East Side. Molly says it is not going to work because Gilbert's is one of the oldest Jewish delis left from the Lower East Side. They soon start bickering and defending their family's delis. Molly has had enough and walks away when Jacob reveals he will be opening his deli on the same street as Gilbert's. Molly ignores Jacob in the building. He finds a coin on the floor, and that night he decides to write to Beth. He shares he believes in God because whenever he feels a bit low, he gets a sign that makes him think that someone up there is watching out for him. He shares he found a heads-up penny which he considers to be a good sign. Molly is still fidgety about a new deli opening and suggests they try new things to attract children and families to come to Gilbert's. Jacob is putting off the signing of the lease, much to the owner's frustration. He feels conflicted and tries to buy more time. In the evening, at the menorah lighting, Molly passes flyers for baking classes. Her dad says she doesn't need to do that because it looks like a desperate attempt. Molly remains unfazed and says they need to try harder to make Gilbert stand out. She feels threatened, and it doesn't go unnoticed by Jacob, who is also there. Molly's dad, Gabe, makes donut-making class fun and all the kids enjoy making their own donuts. Molly spots Jacob outside the deli and packs one donut for him. She stomps outside and hands him the donut and retorts he can see how they make it. She thinks Jacob is there to steal the recipe. Before going back inside, she claims he can't do it better. Jacob tastes the donut, and it blows his mind as to how good it is. Molly receives her letter when she comes back to her apartment. David shares that sharing things with her is the only bright spot in his life, considering how chaotic his real life has become. Molly resonates with his letter and writes back, sharing how a person she thought was a friend might put her out of her business. She can't help but feel whatever he said about her business may be right. But she is torn between the fact that the harder she pushes to save her business, the more upset she makes her family. She is also having a change in outlook on matchmaking, and maybe soulmates are real, as David has mentioned in his letter. And just then, she too finds a heads-up penny in front of her. So she tapes it to the letter and sends it to David. She goes to the reception and hands the letter to Thomas. Jacob is just upstairs when he hears Molly saying Mizanski's name and rushes downstairs. He asks Thomas if he has some deliveries, and Thomas hands him the letter. Jacob realizes Molly is Beth. Jacob rushes to Gilbert's and says he needs to talk with Molly. She is busy loading food as there is a Hanukkah party at JCC, and she is catering there. Jacob says he's going to help, and they can talk on their way. Molly's parents welcome him, but Molly doesn't seem so pleased. Eve thinks it is very sweet of Jacob and invites him to Shabbat dinner that week. Molly shouts no, but her mom dismisses her. Jacob ends up helping her at the party. They have a good time, and Molly shows him how to correctly eat shonda. Jacob gives it to Molly for her genius trick to keep all the toppings from falling. They take a walk around the city, and Molly tells him about the history of the buildings in their neighborhood. Molly speaks passionately about her deli and what significance it has. She asks him why he doesn't choose a trendier place where the modern approach is more acceptable. He says he truly doesn't want to do anything to hurt their business, but his family insists on opening a deli there, especially her Bubby, and he can't go against that. He then shows her where he plans to open Zimmer's, and it is the same building she was talking about. The location is a big advantage for Zimmer's, and contemplating how it would affect their deli makes Molly upset, and she walks away. Jacob looks at the two pennies and then the building, thinking about how he can make things right between them. At the menorah lighting, the turnout is even less, making Molly anxious. Seeing her being like this for days, her family asks her what she is hiding from them. She tells them Zimmer's are coming to their street. She doesn't disclose how she knows it. Ruth says she had visited them in the 1970s and comments about their menu being all over the place. She says they don't have anything to worry about. They talk about the rent increase. It comes as a shock to Molly as she wasn't aware of the hikes, so she pleads with her family to trust her with the deli and her plans to make it more popular. Jacob writes to Molly sharing his concerns about hurting either of the parties, whom he cares about a lot, no matter what he decides, and Molly writes back advising him to keep everything on the table, and to hope everything will work out. Jacob collects his letter and reads it. Suddenly Molly comes in, and Thomas helps Jacob hide the envelope. Jacob comes to know Molly is onto something and asks if he can help. He convinces her to tell because, eventually, he'll come to know. So she divulges that Christmas is coming. So with authentic Jewish food, she has collaborated with some friends from Chinatown who will be cooking Chinese food to serve. But the problem is, she just has got the reins at the deli, and she doesn't know how to reach a larger audience on social media. Jacob reminds her of his friend Ezra and says he is a social media manager, and he can help her. Molly can't understand why Jacob is helping her. Jacob explains that it is the right thing to do, and he cares a lot about Gilbert's, her family, and her. Molly confesses she cares about him too, but she reveals she has feelings for someone else too and tells him about the matchmaking and the letters. Jacob tries to tell her the truth, but she doesn't let him speak. Jacob advises her to meet the guy she has been writing letters to and see if they are really meant to be. He further says to put everything out on the table. Molly is surprised to hear the words and is suddenly at a loss for words. Finally, she composes herself and says she'll write to him and see if he can meet her tomorrow. Jacob asks if she will let him help her for tonight's event. Molly thanks him and says that would be great. Everybody is enjoying the movie and Chinese food. Molly can't help but notice little things that Jacob does that remind her of David. Molly's parents agree her idea is working amazingly and that social media is not that bad after all. They thank Jacob for all his help. Jacob realizes Molly hasn't told her family about him. Molly says it would have been too much for them. Besides, she took his advice to come up with that night's idea. She agrees change is good. Jacob also confesses that seeing Molly and her family has made him realize if Zimmer's has lost touch with their roots and from where they came, and if they are truly ready to open a branch here. He feels they are not ready yet. Molly is hopeful again and asks if the decision he's taking is business-oriented, and not because he thinks it would get them together. Jacob asks why can't it be both, but Molly is adamant about David. Jacob says he prefers Jacob, but Molly doesn't get the hint. They return to their apartment laughing and bring some food for Thomas. Once Molly leaves, Jacob asks him to tell him the very instant Molly gives him the letter. He can't wait to tell her how he feels. Molly is excited because of the positive responses Gilbert's has been getting. Everybody is posting about them on social media. She excuses herself to get ready. Her family asks where she is going, and she tells them she's going to meet David. Instead of feeling happy for her, they feel doubtful about the matchmaker because they think Jacob and she would make a perfect couple. To dissuade them, she tells them that Zimmer's is owned by Jacob's family. It comes as a shock to them. Gabe is furious that he might have stolen recipes, but Molly defends him and says he doesn't want to put them out of business. He is a good person. That puts her family at ease. Jacob meets Molly at reception and compliments her on how good she looks. He jokes about David being short, but Molly says it doesn't matter to her as what is inside counts. Jacob waits for her to leave and starts explaining everything to Toma. Thomas reminds him he didn't ask. Suddenly, Jacob's mom walks in and smothers him with kisses. His dad is furious with him for not signing the lease. He had a word with the owner, and she doubts if Jacob even wants to sign the deal, so they have come to finalize the deal today. Jacob says he'll talk to Bubby first and explain to her what is going on. He says he'll do it after he comes back from an important lunch meeting. But Ed gives him an hour as they'll be meeting the owner of the building in an hour, leaving no choice for Jacob but to talk to his Bubby then. Molly has reached the restaurant, and as she waits for David, she goes through her pictures with Jacob. Jacob sits with his Bubby, and she reveals her family history in the town and how her parents fell in love in the city. Jacob says she should have told him earlier as that would have given him a new perspective to look at the city from. Bubby continues telling him that even though they moved west and 9 months later opened Zimmer's Deli, in her journal, she wished to open a deli in the place it all started. She's not getting any younger, and it would mean a lot to her if her parents' dream of opening a deli here in the East becomes a reality. Jacob says he understands, and his Bubby thanks him. Molly waits for some time, but looking at the pictures of her and Jacob makes her realize something, and she starts writing to David. She shares that she doesn't know why he didn't make it on time today, but she can't thank him enough for opening up to her, helping her understand herself a little better, and inspiring her to say what needs to be said. She knows someday he'll find his shirt, but she has already found hers. She knows it is a little complicated, but she thinks they can make it work. Even if it might not, she cannot give up without trying. She wishes him the best and another good luck penny if she had one. She reveals her real name and says if he ever visits the Lower East Side, she insists he stops by Gilbert's Deli so she can buy her good friend David lunch. After the menorah's lighting, Molly looks for Jacob but can't find him anywhere. Ruth asks her if she met David, but she says she decided not to meet him. She says Jacob is the one for her. Her bubby is happy for her as her happiness matters to her the most. But she adds a disclaimer that if his stupid deli puts them out of business, he is dead to her. Molly is not so worried because he had said he is going to talk his family out of opening a deli there. But even if it doesn't work, she believes the business shouldn't come before love. Ruth says it shouldn't if the love is real. She hugs Molly and wishes her luck as Molly goes to find Jacob. Jacob comes back to the apartment and asks Thomas if Molly stopped by. He gives him the letter she dropped for David. Jacob opens and reads it. He is beyond ecstatic that Molly broke up with him to be with him. He tries controlling his excitement and goes to find her. They meet outside, and Molly tells him how she didn't meet David because he was late, and she wrote to him that it is not going to work between them. Jacob asks her if she broke up with him because he was late. Molly laughs and says she broke up with him because all she could do was think about Jacob. Jacob caresses her and looks tense, so she asks him what happened. Jacob tells her his family is in the city, and they sign the deal. They are opening Zimmer's in the spring. Molly is taken aback. She says she thought he would talk them out of it. Jacob shares that he didn't know until today, but his family has a deep-rooted past in the city. He promises he wouldn't let anything happen to Gilbert. Molly says if she knew Jacob's family had roots in the place, she would never have asked him to move away from carrying his family's legacy. He has his own history to honor. Jacob is confused because she had said they couldn't be together because of the family businesses. Molly says she might have said that, but if it is meant to be, they should at least try to find a way to make this work. With welled-up eyes, he says she is amazing. He says he has one more thing to tell her. He takes out the penny and keeps it heads up on her palm. She laughs at first, not understanding what he means, but then realizes, and her expressions change. She doesn't say anything and walks away. Jacob follows her, explaining that he was going to tell her at lunch, but his parents showed up, and he tried to stop them, but then he talked to his grandmother, and everything changed. With tears in her eyes, she asks him how long he has known she is Beth. Jacob replies 3 days. He explains he waited because he wanted to make sure they were not opening Zimmer's here, and then he would have told her the good news. He continues explaining that he wanted to do the right thing, but everything turned out to be wrong. Molly says it isn't about the deli anymore but trust, which is gone. She gives him the penny back and leaves. When she returns home crying, Ruth gets concerned. Jacob, too, calls his bubby and tells her everything. The next day, Ruth visits the Mizanskys' matchmaking office. Esther is already there waiting as the office is locked. As they start revealing the details of why they are there, the two women realize their grandchildren are set with one another. After an intense glaring competition, they start bickering about their food being the best. To prove their points, they make a bet. After the lighting of the 8th light, they'll have a competition to see whose lakhs are the best. The winner will get uncontested bragging rights of the best lakhs in New York City forever. It seemed as if Rose Mizansky had thought it through. And once both the ladies were gone, she opened her office and smiled as she knew exactly what was coming next. The levies reach Gilbert. Molly is stubborn, even after Jacob tries to make things a little less tense between the two. Their mothers understand each other and say their children deeply care about each other. They just want their kids to be happy. They call their husbands, and Gabe and Ed share pleasantries. They praise each other's business success and say there are no hard feelings, and they laugh when they discuss that the bet is not legally binding, and none of them is going to tell the grandmothers that. They apologize as they have never seen either Ruth or Esther behaving like this. Online, their challenge is called the Battle of the Bubbies. The lakhs are made, and Gabe says they want someone that neither family knows to put the lakhs out. At that moment, Rose appears. Nobody recognizes her, and she is given the task of putting out the lakhs, so no one knows which ones are whose. Gabe asks if they need applesauce or sour cream. Jacob and Molly say both in harmony. Soon the lakhs are distributed, but they realize both taste the same. Ruth accuses Jacob of stealing their recipe, but Esther counters her. She takes a postcard from her mother out of her purse, which has the recipe written on the backside. Esther claims they made their lakhs using the recipe passed down by her mother, which she brought with her from Russia. Ruth takes one look at it and says it can't be. She doesn't explain anything and asks for her journal. Ruth takes out a card with the same recipe written down by her mother, which she bought with her from Poland. They all are surprised and soon learn their mothers came to the city in 1914 on the same ship called the Rotterdam. Ruth remembers her mother telling her about meeting a girl of her age on the ship and that they wouldn't have survived without each other. They were like sisters. They decided they were going to share everything, their dreams, hopes, fears, and family recipes. Ruth recalls her name as Sarah, and Esther says it was her mother's name. Ruth then reads out some lines her mother had written about Sarah and how she wished her all the happiness. They consider it a Hanukkah miracle. Ruth turns to Molly and Jacob and says they were meant to find each other, and Esther adds they all were meant to find each other. The families hug each other, and Molly and Jacob go out to talk. Molly says she is still mad at him, but Jacob rationalizes that he didn't tell her because he wanted to make things right, just like she did when she didn't tell her family who he was. Molly realizes he is right. He believes they can make it and asks for one last chance for him to be everything that she fell for with David. Molly says yes, and adds she fell for Jacob even more. Jacob says no matter who they are, he is sure of one thing, that they are soulmates. Molly adds they are each other b'shirt. With that, Jacob leans in and kisses Molly. Their families cheer from the back. Jacob thinks it would have been great if they could open a deli together. Ruth says they were discussing the same thing, and they can name it Rebecca and Sarah's Deli, or Sarah and Rebecca's Deli, Esther adds. They agree to flip a coin and ask for a coin. Molly and Jacob reach into their pockets and take out their coins. Ruth suggests they do it later. Jacob keeps his coin on Molly's palm and wishes her happy Hanukkah. Molly also gives her coin to Jacob and wishes him the same. And they kiss under the menorah's lights. And Rose's record still has a 100% success rate. A photograph shows that Jacob and Molly opened a new deli with the name Sarah and Rebecca's Deli, Rebecca and Sarah's Deli, satisfying both their families.